You've said it today. Almost certainly. Good job. Well done. You're so smart. I'm so proud of you. These are the phrases that feel like good parenting. They feel warm and encouraging and right. They feel like exactly the kind of thing a loving parent should say to a child who is trying hard and doing well. And for decades, that's what parents were told. Praise your children. Build them up. Tell them they're smart, they're talented, they're wonderful. More praise equals more confidence. More confidence equals a child who is ready to take on the world. It sounds so reasonable, and most of us grew up inside that logic. But something has been happening in the research, quietly, consistently, across study after study, that most parents have never been told about. And it changes everything about how we think about praise. The children who are told they're smart are not becoming more confident. They're becoming more fragile, more afraid to fail, more likely to avoid challenges, more likely to fall apart when things get difficult. And the children who are praised differently, not for who they are, but for something else entirely, are developing a kind of confidence that doesn't collapse under pressure, a kind of confidence that actually grows when things get hard, instead of shrinking. This video is about the difference between those two things, what it actually is, why it matters more than almost any other parenting habit, what it does to a child's brain over months and years, and exactly what to say instead, not in theory, but in the specific real moments you'll face today, this week, and for the rest of your child's life. Let's start with a study that changed the way researchers think about praise entirely. In the late 1990s, a psychologist named Carol Dweck and her colleagues ran a series of experiments with children around 10 years old. They gave each child a puzzle to solve, one that was straightforward enough that nearly every child could complete it successfully. After the child finished, the researchers gave them one of two types of feedback. Half the children were told, "You must be really smart at this." The other half were told, "You must have worked really hard at that." One sentence. And what happened next revealed something most people were not expecting. After receiving their feedback, the children were offered a choice. They could try a harder puzzle, one they might not complete, or an easier, one they would almost certainly do well on. The children who had been told they were smart overwhelmingly chose the easier puzzle. They had just been told they were smart, and they didn't want to do anything that might prove otherwise. The children who had been told they worked hard overwhelmingly chose the harder one. They had been told their effort mattered, and so effort was what they wanted to give more of. Then both groups were given a genuinely difficult puzzle, one designed to be unsolvable so that every child would experience failure. And here is where the real difference appeared. The children praised for intelligence became distressed. They lost confidence rapidly. Many of them said that the failure meant they weren't smart after all. They stopped enjoying the task, they started making excuses, and when given easier puzzles afterward, they performed worse than they had at the very beginning. The children praised for effort responded in the opposite direction. They persisted longer, they stayed more engaged. They told researchers they thought they just needed to try harder. Many of them said the difficult puzzle was their favorite part. And when given easier puzzles afterward, their performance actually improved. One sentence of feedback, at the beginning of one experiment, produced two completely different children by the end of it. Now imagine that's not one experiment. Imagine that's every day, for years. To understand why this happens, you need to understand what a child's brain is doing with praise, not the surface meaning of the words, but the deeper message it extracts. When you tell a child "good job" or "you're so smart," the brain files that under a specific category. It registers as an evaluation. An adult looked at what I did, or who I am, and judged it positively. And evaluations, the brain quickly learns, can go in either direction. If "good job" is the result of doing something well, then "bad job," or the silence where "good job" should be, is what follows when you don't do well. The praise creates a scale, and the child knows, somewhere beneath conscious awareness, that they can fall on either side of it. This is why children who receive heavy outcome-based praise become anxious about performance. It's not that the praise made them feel bad, it's that it taught them they are being evaluated, constantly. by the people whose love and approval matter most to them in the world. Over time, this shapes every choice they make. They start to gravitate toward things they know they can do well, because doing well produces the praise, and the praise produces the feeling of safety. They start to avoid things that are uncertain or difficult, because failure might produce the absence of praise, and that absence starts to feel like something very close to disapproval. This is what a fixed mindset looks like from the inside. Not arrogance, not laziness. Fear. A deep, quiet, relentless fear of being found out as someone who isn't as good as everyone thinks. And here is the heartbreaking part. This does not come from parents who don't care. It comes in many cases from parents who care enormously, and who express that care through praise that accidentally taught their child that love and approval are things that can be earned and lost. There's a second thing that good job does, and it's worth understanding on its own. It ends the conversation. Good job is a verdict. It tells the child that you have seen their work, evaluated it, and delivered your conclusion. There is nowhere left to go. The loop is closed. Compare that to a question. What part of that was hardest for you? What did you have to figure out to make that work? Is there anything you'd want to change about it? These are not evaluations. They are invitations. They say, I'm interested in your experience of what you just did, not just in whether it was good. And that difference between being evaluated and being understood is enormous to a child. When a child is evaluated, they learn to perform for the evaluator. Every piece of work, every effort, every attempt becomes something they are producing for someone else's judgment. Their relationship with their own work becomes mediated through that external verdict. When a child is understood, they learn something completely different. They learn to look at their own experience as something worth examining, to notice what was hard, what was interesting, what they would do differently, to build a relationship with their own effort that doesn't depend on what anyone else thinks of it. Self-reflection is the skill that underlies almost everything we associate with emotional intelligence, resilience, and genuine self-confidence. And it doesn't develop when someone is always handing you a verdict. It develops when someone asks you the right question, and then waits for your answer. Good job produces a child who looks outward for approval. The right response produces a child who gradually learns to look inward for understanding. That shift is the whole game. Now let's talk about the different forms this takes in real life, because the pattern isn't only about intelligence and achievement, it shows up in subtle ways across almost every interaction. Think about the child who draws a picture and brings it to you. What do you say? Most parents say something like, "Oh, that's beautiful. I love it. Good job." The child smiles, puts the drawing down, and walks away. The interaction is complete. But think about what didn't happen. The child didn't tell you what the drawing is about. They didn't explain why they chose those colors, or what was happening in the scene, or how long it took them to get the person's face the way they wanted it. None of that came out because the verdict closed the door before any of it could. Now think about what happens if instead you say, "Tell me about this. What's happening here?" The child's face changes. They explain the story, the characters, the choices they made. They're not performing for your approval anymore. They're sharing something that matters to them with someone who wants to understand it. That is an entirely different experience of being a child, and it is available in every single one of these ordinary moments. The same thing happens with sport, with schoolwork, with the building blocks they spent 20 minutes constructing, with the song they're trying to learn on the piano. Every time a verdict replaces a question, a door closes. Every time a question replaces a verdict, a door opens. Let's go deeper into what happens over time when praise is tied to identity rather than effort. A child who is repeatedly told they are smart develops an identity around that intelligence. It becomes part of how they understand themselves. I am a smart person. That is who I am. This sounds positive, but what it means in practice is that their intelligence is now something they have to protect. When a smart child encounters something they don't immediately understand, the experience is not just frustrating, it's threatening. If I don't understand this quickly, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought. Maybe as smart as everyone thinks. And if I'm not smart, what am I? This is why gifted children who have been told their whole lives how clever they are, so often struggle when they reach the point in education where things stop coming easily. They have been praised for the quality of their mind, not for the habit of working through difficulty. And so, when difficulty arrives, they have no framework for it. No story that says this is just a hard problem. The only story they have says this is evidence that I'm not who I thought I was. You can see this in classrooms. The child who refuses to try a problem unless they're sure they'll get it right. The child who says, I'm not good at this after one attempt. The child who produces flawless, safe work and never takes the creative risk that might result in something genuinely interesting, because genuinely interesting requires uncertainty, and uncertainty is too dangerous. These children are not failing academically. They're often succeeding. But they're succeeding on a foundation of avoidance rather than growth, and the gap between what they're producing and what they're capable of will grow wider over time. Now let's talk about what to say instead. Because understanding the problem is only half of this, there are 3 approaches that work in different situations. Let's go through each of them. The first is process praise. Instead of praising the outcome, the drawing, the grade, the goal, the finished product, you praise the specific process the child went through to produce it. You noticed something wasn't working and changed your approach. You kept going even when it got hard. You practiced that part over and over before it felt right. Process praise does something that outcome praise cannot. It gives the child a replicable story, not I am smart, which is a fixed state you either possess or you don't. But I tried a different approach when I got stuck, which is a behavior. Something they can do again tomorrow in a completely different situation with completely different material. The story of effort generalizes. The story of talent doesn't. When you say you really stuck with that even when it got frustrating, you're not just acknowledging this particular moment, you're building a portrait of the child as someone who persists, and portraits, built over hundreds of interactions, become identity, but a healthy identity, one grounded in behavior rather than in a fixed quality, that can be taken away. The second approach is observation without judgment. This is especially powerful with younger children, and it is simpler than it might sound. You describe what you see, without adding a verdict. You used a lot of blue in that painting. You kept building it higher even after it fell over twice. You practiced that part 4 times before you moved on. This sounds almost too minimal, but here is what it does. It teaches the child to notice their own work without waiting for an external assessment of it. It builds the habit of self-observation, and it communicates something profound without saying it directly. I am paying attention to you, not to judge, just to see. Over time, children who receive this kind of response become genuinely less dependent on external validation, not because you withheld it strategically, but because they were never trained to need it in the first place. The habit that developed was looking at their own work, not looking at you to find out what to think about it. The third approach is effort acknowledgement paired with curiosity. This works especially well when a child has struggled, persisted through something difficult, or produced something they worked hard on over time. You worked on that for a long time. How does it feel now that it's done? That looked really challenging. What made you keep going? I noticed you changed that part 3 times. What were you trying to get right? These questions do several things at once. They acknowledge the effort, which directs attention toward process rather than outcome. And then they redirect the child's attention inward, to their own experience, their own judgment, their own sense of what they were trying to do, and whether they got there. Not what do I think of your work? What do you think? How do you feel about it? What did you learn? Because that is ultimately the goal, not to replace your praise with something equally external, but to help the child develop their own relationship with their own efforts, their own standard, their own internal compass for what counts as good work and what still needs more. That internal compass is what genuine confidence is built on, not the belief that a reliable person thinks well of you. The belief that you understand yourself, your effort, your process, your ability to work through difficulty, and that you can trust that knowledge even when no one else is in the room. Let's talk about a challenge that comes up when parents start making this shift. Because it isn't always comfortable, Many children, when they first stop receiving easy outcome praise, will push for it. Do you like it? Is it good? Did I do a good job? Am I the best at this? And the natural instinct, because you love them and you genuinely want them to feel good, is to give them what they're asking for. Of course, it's wonderful. You did great. I love it. Try to notice that moment and redirect rather than fill. What do you think of it? Are you happy with how it turned out? Is there a part you're especially pleased with? You're not withholding love. You're not being cold or clinical or withholding warmth. You're redirecting their attention from the external source of judgment back to their own developing capacity to evaluate their own work. This feels awkward for about 30 seconds, and over time, it is one of the most genuinely loving things you can do for a child. Because what you're refusing to do when you redirect instead of evaluate is train your child to need you in order to feel okay about themselves. You're building a different kind of self-reliance, not the self-reliance of the avoidant child who learned not to need anyone because no one was reliably there, but the self-reliance of the child who learned, through hundreds of gentle redirections, that their own opinion of their work is the one worth developing. There is one more thing worth addressing, and it is this. Many parents, when they hear all of this, feel a kind of retroactive anxiety about every good job they've ever said. Let that go. The research is not saying that warm, spontaneous expressions of pride and love are harmful. They are not. A parent who occasionally says that's amazing, or I'm so proud of you, is not damaging their child. These moments are part of the texture of a loving relationship, and they belong there. What the research is pointing to is the pattern, the habit. What the child hears most often, in the most formative moments, across thousands of ordinary interactions over years. If the dominant pattern is evaluation, if your child's primary experience of sharing their work with you is receiving a verdict, then over time, that is what their relationship with their own effort will be built around. If the dominant pattern is curiosity and process acknowledgement, if what they experience most often is someone genuinely interested in how they did it, what they were trying, what they would change, then that is what their relationship with their own effort will be built around. You don't need to audit every interaction. You don't need to eliminate warmth or enthusiasm. You just need to shift the default, from verdict to question, from evaluation to observation, from what I think of your work to what you notice about it yourself. That shift, practiced consistently over months and years, produces something that praise alone never could. It produces a child who doesn't need to be told they did well in order to keep going. A child who can sit with uncertainty without needing someone to tell them it will be okay. A child who, when they fail, and they will fail, because everyone does, doesn't interpret that failure as evidence about who they are, just information about what to try differently. That child is not built by more praise. They are built by the right question asked at the right moment, by someone who was genuinely interested in the answer. Good job gives a child a verdict. What you're learning to give them is a voice, and that is something they will carry long after they stop needing yours.